He handed me a $30,000 tip in the back of my old Toyota Camry, then died just 12 hours later. Silas Thorne, an 82-year-old Wall Street titan, sat in my worn, stained back seat, and his hands, which had signed checks for billions, were trembling. The air in the car on that freezing December night in Manhattan smelled like the cheap air freshener I used to mask the lingering scent of my own failure. His words, soft and ragged, were the only thing that cut through the silence of the city. "You remind me of a ghost," he whispered, pressing a folded envelope into my palm. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were filled with a profound, terrifying sadness that mirrored the emptiness I saw in my own reflection every morning. The moment was not an exchange of cash for service. It was a collision of two broken lives, separated by wealth, but united by regret. 48 hours later, I was sitting across from Adrian Pierce, Thorne's executor, in an office on the 83rd floor of the Empire State Building, a marble and leather mausoleum of power. I was there because that ghost of a man had left me his entire estate, $89 million. My mind rejected the number, searching for an error, waiting for the punchline. But when Pierce read Thorne's handwritten letter, explaining why he had chosen me, a man he had known for less than an hour, to inherit a fortune and an enduring secret, I felt the air leave my lungs. I collapsed into a deep, agonizing sob, the kind of grief that doesn't just mourn the past but rips the future open. Thorne's last wish, a legacy forged in 37 years of silent pain, was about a secret connection neither of us knew existed, a truth that broke my heart and simultaneously offered me a second chance I was too proud to accept. 6 months before that fateful ride, Darren Locke, had been a small-time financial broker with a respectable office in the financial district, a thriving roster of small business clients, and enough self-importance to fill the entire New York Stock Exchange. I ran Locke & Associates. My father, a carpenter from Long Island who had worked with his hands all his life, was proud of my success, even if he never truly understood the abstract risk of my world. My world, built on ambition and high-stakes gambles, imploded in 2008, not with the main crash, but with the slow, agonizing burn that followed. I was too arrogant to liquidate, too stubborn to admit I had bet on the wrong horse. I lost everything, including my wife, Sarah, and the ability to see my daughter, Chloe. Now, my 20-year-old Toyota Camry, bought during my short-lived era of wealth, was my office, my dining room, and my prison. I navigated the dense, lonely streets of Queens and Brooklyn, picking up strangers for a few dollars, meticulously tracking my earnings to cover the rent on a cramped storage unit that housed the remnants of my former life. The constant, gnawing arithmetic of gas money versus food money was the cruelest calculation of all. I had failed not just at business, but at the only thing that mattered, being a reliable son, a good brother, and a stable father. The worst part was my pride. My father kept leaving carefully worded voicemails, trying to offer me cash. "I have too much in saving, Wes, son. Would you mind helping me use some of it?" I always deleted them, choosing cold canned food over admitting defeat. My ex-wife, Sarah, had warned me years ago. "Darren, you're too stubborn to ask for help until you're already sinking, and by then you're taking everyone down with you." She was right. Sarah, who had remarried and settled in Connecticut, was the only one shielding our 10-year-old daughter, Chloe, from the total ruin of her father. I was living between adventures. I told Chloe during our strained monthly video calls, but the truth was, I was just surviving one more day. The failure of Locke & Associates was a slow-motion catastrophe in the unforgiving world of Wall Street. It wasn't the kind of bankruptcy that ends in a splashy newspaper headline. It was a quiet, humiliating fade at its peak. I had managed mid-six-figure portfolios for dozens of successful small business owners, the real backbone of New York's economy. I'd believed my own hype, expanding too quickly into high-risk derivatives, chasing the impossible returns promised by the late 2000s boom. When the market corrected, my stubborn refusal to cut losses, fueled by the belief that I was smarter than the trend, sent the whole thing tumbling. My brother, Michael, who had left a stable job with the city's sanitation department to handle my compliance, lost his life savings. He wouldn't return my calls. His last message a brutal echo. "You didn't just lose money. Darren, you lost my trust. You lost the future I promised my wife." The estrangement from my father, Robert, was quieter but deeper. He was a master carpenter, a man who saw success only in tangible things, the strength of a foundation, the perfect fit of a joint. He had built our family's greenhouse in Long Island with his own hands, a monument to practical, honest work. My world of leveraged bets and abstract assets was always alien to him. When I failed, his concern was less about the money and more about the disgrace. "Why didn't you just ask me for help, son? I could have built you a better safety net than those computer spreadsheets," he'd asked, the hurt in his voice louder than any accusation. I saw his world as too simple. He saw mine as fundamentally dishonest. That pride, that stubborn refusal to admit I needed a carpenter's help to fix a broker's mistake, had been my final undoing. That cold December evening, the Uber app pinged with a ride that made my heart sink and simultaneously race. A premium pickup from the lobby of the Thorn Tower on Park Avenue, heading downtown to the St. Regis Hotel. The Thorn Tower, a sleek obsidian structure, was the fortress of Silas Thorn, the man known as the architect in hedge fund circles. He was the kind of titan whose name was synonymous with impossible wealth, the kind of money I had only ever chased, never held. I imagined the passenger would be a young, arrogant investment banker, ready to complain about my beat-up car. What I found waiting under the awning was Silas Thorn himself. He was not towering, but he carried himself with an invisible gravitas. His charcoal cashmere coat, his custom Italian leather briefcase, every item screamed quiet, generational wealth. But his eyes were the thing. They were not the fierce, predatory eyes I remembered from the financial magazines. They were empty, haunted, fixed on something far away and long dead. As I popped the trunk of my Toyota Camry, he didn't bark instructions. He placed a single leather-bound suitcase inside and turned to me. "Thank you, young man," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, carrying a faint, refined Boston accent. "I know these New York nights can be grueling for a driver." His words were measured, genuine, the kind of sincerity I hadn't heard since my last failed meeting with a bankruptcy attorney. For a brief moment, as he settled into the back seat, the Camry didn't feel like a prison. It felt, impossibly, like a confessional. I realized then that I wasn't driving a titan of Wall Street. I was driving a man who was already halfway to becoming a ghost. The ride had begun, not as a transaction, but as a path toward a secret I didn't know I was destined to carry. The Camry felt heavy with the silence of two men carrying secrets too large for the vehicle. Most passengers from Park Avenue used the ride to take calls or complain about traffic. Silas Thorn did neither. He simply watched the lights of Manhattan streak by, occasionally sighing a breath that sounded like grinding metal. He broke the silence about 10 minutes in, right as we were merging onto the FDR Drive. "You have the hands of a worker, Mr. Locke," he observed, his voice startlingly direct. "But your clothes suggest you were once a man of the office. What brought you to this particular transition?" I hesitated. I usually gave the rote answer: bad contracts, worse timing. But there was something in his gaze, reflected faintly in the rearview mirror, that demanded honesty. It was the same look of devastating self-awareness I often saw in my own eyes. "It was self-inflicted failure, sir," I admitted, my voice rough. "I ran a small brokerage firm, Locke & Associates. I was good, but I got greedy. I chased the easy money, ignored the fundamentals my father taught me about sound construction. When the market shifted, I was too proud to pivot. I lost everything, including the capital my younger brother, Michael, had trusted me with for his retirement. Silas Thorne nodded slowly, the movement almost imperceptible. Ah, the illusion of being smarter than the market, a fatal conceit. Darren. Hearing him use my name, coupled with his blunt summary of my undoing, sent a chill down my spine. I know that feeling. I've spent my life building a fortress of wealth, only to realize I was building a monument to my own isolation. He paused, then stared at the dark waters of the East River. I am 82. Darren. My doctors at New York Presbyterian gave me a few weeks. My heart, the one thing I thought was unbreakable because it was so cold, is failing. I came here to New York from Boston for one final task, to close a foundation I set up 37 years ago, shortly after I committed the greatest sin of my life, a sin tied directly to the kind of ambition you describe. His confession was dropped like a heavy anchor. A sin, sir? I asked, gripping the wheel. My only son. Richard, he began, his voice dropping to a whisper. He was brilliant, but impatient. A dreamer. He wanted to expand our fund nationally, wanted to chase younger, riskier tech investments. I was the old lion. I told him he was an amateur, a shadow. I said he'd never be worthy of the Thorne name until he learned patience. We argued terribly, a shouting match in my Park Avenue office that lasted an hour. I threw his analysis back in his face. What happened? I asked, knowing the answer would be terrible. He drove out of the city that night, angry, drinking, trying to prove something to a father who would never get the chance to see it. Silas's hand went up to his chest, clutching the cashmere over his heart. He died in a single-car accident on the Jersey Turnpike. That was 37 years ago. I've been carrying the weight of that argument, the weight of the unsaid apology, ever since. I'm here now to pay a debt, a final act of penance for a ghost I created. I drove in stunned silence, the air thick with his decades of regret. This Wall Street titan, who could buy and sell my entire failed life 1,000 times over, was just a broken old man, searching for forgiveness he couldn't earn. And in his search, he had found me, a mirror of the young, ambitious failure he had driven away. We drove in silence past the flashing lights of a police cruiser near the financial district, a silent reminder of risk and consequence. I felt the need to apologize for my own failures, to offer some empty platitude. But the look in Silas's eyes stopped me. He didn't want comfort. He wanted a witness. 37 years, he finally said, his voice barely audible. That's how long I've spent building a legacy that feels like nothing more than an expensive cage. I told Richard, my son, that patience builds empires, but my impatience to be right killed him. I was wrong. Darren, I was wrong to mistake his passion for disrespect. I was wrong to assume my way was the only way. He shifted, pulling a heavy, leather-bound wallet from his coat pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate, the actions of a man acutely aware of the dwindling moments he had left. He produced a crisp, personalized card and a smartphone. The money means nothing to me now. Darren, the funds are already transferred. He paused, looking directly into my eyes in the rearview mirror. I saw Richard in you tonight, the same stubborn jaw, the same fire in the eyes that's been smothered by failure. You listened to me. You let me grieve without offering the hollow reassurances that everyone else gives a dying millionaire. That, my young friend, is worth more than any rate I could have paid you for the ride. He showed me the transaction screen on his phone, $30,000 transferred via wire. This is not a tip, he declared. This is a debt paid to the son I failed to listen to. I want you to make me a promise, tonight, before you sleep. Call your father. Tell him everything. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you need him. Do not let your pride turn him into a ghost you can only speak to in a parked car." The weight of his words hit me harder than the sight of the money. I, too, had put my arrogance, my genius broker persona, above the simple, tangible love of my father, the carpenter. I would trade every dollar I'd ever chased on Wall Street for one more chance to undo the shame I'd caused him. Silas Thorne hadn't just given me money. He had given me an urgent mission, a direct order to confront my oldest wound. His fierce, dying gaze seemed to say, "Your father is still breathing. Don't make him wait 37 years for a simple phone call." I promise, Mr. Thorne," I managed, my voice breaking. "Good." He sighed, the tension in his shoulders finally easing slightly. He handed me his card, his finger tracing the embossed lettering. "If you ever need advice, someone to listen who understands what it means to truly fail, call me. Not about money, about the thing that matters most." The car pulled up to the grand iron-wrought entrance of the St. Regis Hotel, and the moment, electric with shared pain, was over. He stepped out. A titan momentarily returned to his throne, leaving me alone in the cramped confines of my shame and a sudden, terrifying fortune. I sat in the cold silence of the Camry, parked behind a shuttered diner in Flushing, Queens, staring at the $30,000 transfer notification on my phone screen. The money felt tainted, too heavy to be real. It wasn't about the cash. It was about the impossible burden of Silas Thorne's command. Don't make him wait 37 years for a simple phone call. I picked up the phone at 10:30 p.m., my hands shaking worse than Silas's had. My father, Robert Locke, who was surely in his Long Island workshop tinkering with some piece of distressed wood to avoid thinking about his failed son, answered on the second ring. "Darren, son, are you all right? You never call this late." His voice was instantly laced with the familiar anxiety of a father who expects bad news. "Dad," I choked out, and that was all I could manage for a solid 10 seconds. The dam I had built around my pride, my failure, my despair, finally shattered. Everything poured out, not just the story of the $30,000 and the dying millionaire, but the truth about my life, the cold ravioli, the sleepless nights in the back of the Camry, the crushing shame of losing Michael's money. I told him how Silas Thorne, a man I'd known for 40 minutes, had seen the same deep, generational fracture in me that he had caused in his own son. "I failed you, Dad," I sobbed, the words tasting metallic with raw humiliation. "I failed everything you taught me about real work, real integrity." My father didn't offer a lecture or a hasty reassurance. His reply was the most powerful thing I had ever heard. "I'm coming. Son, tell me exactly where you are." He drove 2 hours through the icy night from the east end of Long Island to Queens, finding me hunched over the steering wheel of the Camry in the deserted parking lot. He didn't ask about the money or the millionaire. He simply opened the car door, pulled me into a fierce carpenter's hug, and held me while I cried about the ghosts of Wall Street, the specter of Richard Thorne, and the stranger who had bought me a chance at redemption. That night, I didn't sleep in the Camry. I slept under my father's roof, in the boyhood room where the scent of sawdust always lingered, the tangible, honest scent of a life I had foolishly abandoned. The next morning, at 6 o'clock STOM, the phone screamed me awake. The caller ID showed a blocked Manhattan number. "Mr. Locke, this is Adrian Pierce from Pearson Associates. I'm Mr. Thorne's attorney. I have difficult news. Mr. Thorne passed away peacefully in his sleep last night at the St. Regis." My hands went numb. He had a massive coronary. Mr. Thorne had a final directive. He made significant, immediate amendments to his will yesterday evening, and they concern you directly. You need to come to our office on the Empire State Building immediately. Silas Thorne had kept his final, irreversible appointment with fate, leaving behind a silence far louder than his $30,000 check. My father, Robert, insisted on driving me back to Manhattan. The Camry, now carrying the impossible weight of a sudden fortune and a profound tragedy, felt different. He sat quietly in the passenger seat, his carpenter hands resting on his knees. A silent bastion of strength. The $30,000 transfer still glowed faintly on my phone screen. An uncashed, unspendable ghost. The offices of Pierce & Associates occupied the summit of the Empire State Building, a dizzying climb from the street-level reality I'd been inhabiting. The reception area was an austere study in mahogany and frosted glass, the kind of place that made you instinctively lower your voice. Adrian Pierce, the attorney, met us. He was impeccably dressed, but his eyes were bloodshot, and his usual crisp demeanor was slightly frayed. He looked like a man who hadn't just lost a client, but a difficult, demanding friend. Mr. Locke. Mr. Thorne insisted on the immediate revision of his final testament last night. He made it clear he didn't have the luxury of waiting. Pierce began, gesturing for us to sit in two impossibly deep leather armchairs. He said, and I quote, "I've waited 37 years too long already. Not one more night." Pierce opened a heavy manila folder. The air in the room thickened with anticipation. My father squeezed my arm, grounding me to the present. Pierce cleared his throat and began reading the formal, legal language, punctuated by the bold, decisive signature of Silas Thorne at the bottom of each page. "Mr. Darren Locke," Pierce stated, his voice ringing with a formal authority, "Silas Thorne has designated you the sole beneficiary of his entire estate, $89 million in liquid assets, controlling interest in the Thorne Global Fund, and properties in 4 states, including his primary residence in Boston and his Park Avenue penthouse." The room spun. 89 million? It was a sum I hadn't even dared to fantasize about in my darkest nights in the Camry. I looked at my father, whose jaw was set in stunned disbelief. "That's impossible," I managed, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. "He didn't know me. We had one conversation, one short ride from Park Avenue." Pierce leaned forward, his expression softening with something like awe. "He knew more than you might think. He was, above all, a man of decisive action. Mr. Locke, he left this for you." He pulled out a sheet of thick, cream-colored stationery, handwritten in Silas Thorne's distinctive, elegant script. "He insisted I read this to you personally, not just hand it over." Pierce took a deep breath, and the silence that followed was absolute, filled only by the distant sounds of New York City, oblivious to the drama unfolding high above it. This was the moment of truth, the revelation of the 37-year-old secret. Adrian Pierce adjusted his tie, his eyes holding mine as he began to read Silas Thorne's final letter. "Darren, I know you will try to refuse this fortune, so I'm going to tell you something that will change your mind." The letter began, written in the steady hand of a titan who was finally unburdening his soul. "After my son, Richard, died, my wife, Eleanor, and I hired private investigators. We needed to know about his final weeks, the life he was living outside the sterile walls of my fund, the things he hid from us. We learned he had been secretly dating a woman named Eliza Hayes. She was 21, a brilliant, passionate social activist working in a community center in the Bronx. She was pregnant when Richard died. My entire world went cold again," I gasped, gripping the edge of the leather chair. "A child. Richard had a child," Pierce continued, reading the profound regret in Silas's voice. "Eliza disappeared shortly after. We searched for years, pouring money into finding her, but she vanished into the labyrinth of New York City. Eleanor, my wife, never forgave herself for not trying harder. Our pride, our belief that the Thorne name was too grand to be associated with an activist from the Bronx, made us hesitate. We lost our only connection to our son. Yesterday afternoon, after I left you, I had my team run one last search, utilizing modern public records and specialized AI technology we didn't have in the 80s. They found Eliza. She died of cancer in 2018. But before that, she had given birth to a daughter in 1988 and placed her for adoption with a family on Long Island. Her name is Chloe. She is 37, married, and runs a small nonprofit that helps inner-city youth with financial literacy. My father, Robert, stood up abruptly, pacing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the massive city. A daughter? Richard had a daughter? He whispered, shaken. Pierce's eyes flickered from my father to me. But here is the final, essential truth. Darren, the one that ties your life to mine. Chloe was adopted by the Hayes family, Eliza's younger sister and her husband. Eliza's sister, who stepped in to give the child a better life, was Sarah Thorne, my daughter-in-law's own sister. But that is not all. He put the letter down and pulled out a small, framed photo, a smiling 10-year-old girl with bright, inquisitive eyes. Chloe is not your only connection to this family. The woman who is raising my granddaughter, the daughter of Richard and Eliza, is Chloe's aunt. The adoptive mother, Sarah Hayes, has a daughter of her own, who just turned 10 this year. Her name is Chloe Locke, your daughter. She's being raised in the shadow of my mistake, by a family connected by the very tragedy I tried to bury. My vision blurred, Pierce continued, his voice heavy with the emotion of the dying man's final confession. I realized yesterday, Darren, that I failed Richard because I prioritized money over passion. And you, Darren, are Richard's spiritual twin. You were sitting in the back of your car, ruined by financial failure. Yet you had enough heart, enough humility, to comfort a dying stranger. You are the man Richard would have become. Someone who falls, but who still has the heart to help. You are family. Darren, in the way that matters most, use this money to build bridges back to the people you love, and to right the wrongs of 2 generations. I sobbed, the leather chair unable to hold the weight of a secret that had taken 37 years and a massive fortune to finally be revealed. The inheritance wasn't a windfall. It was a devastating responsibility. I didn't just restart a brokerage firm. That would have been a betrayal of the lessons Silas Thorne died trying to teach me. The money was a tool, meant to build bridges to my father, my daughter, and the ghosts of Richard and Silas Thorne. My first act was to find Chloe Hayes, Richard Thorne's daughter, and my newly discovered cousin. She was a brilliant, grounded woman running a small financial literacy nonprofit in Brooklyn. I met her in a modest coffee shop. She had Silas's piercing winter eyes, but also a kindness I recognized in the memory of my father's quiet support. She revealed that she'd always had a hole, a question mark about her origins. And now, looking at me, she saw the pieces of her father's puzzle finally fitting together. She agreed to take a leadership role in the legacy I was building. The true work began when I established the Second Trade Foundation. The name was intentional. It wasn't about the money. It was about the second chance at integrity. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide bridge funding and psychological support for entrepreneurs and young investors facing catastrophic failure, particularly those suffering from the shame and isolation that financial ruin brings in American culture. We understood that bankruptcy isn't a moral failing, but sometimes just bad timing meeting worse circumstances. My brother, Michael, was the first person I approached. I found him working the late shift at the sanitation depot. I didn't offer him his money back. I offered him a purpose. When I laid out the foundation's mission, to help people who screwed up exactly like I did, he stood speechless for a minute. Then, he hugged me for the first time since my firm collapsed. He now runs the foundation's operations, a pillar of stability and practical counsel. My father, Robert, never touched the money, but his expertise built our foundation's headquarters, a community center in Brooklyn where he held workshops on building a foundation that lasts. teaching integrity through carpentry. And Chloe Locke, my daughter, I began spending structured, consistent time with her, not as the failed broker, but as the founder of a place dedicated to hope. Sarah, my ex-wife, saw the change. The money had restored my stability, but the mission had restored my soul. I still drive for Uber Lyft every Thursday morning for the early airport shift. It keeps me tethered, reminding me how quickly life can change in the back of a beat-up Camry. Last month, I picked up a young man, a promising tech founder, whose startup had just imploded. He was talking about his shame, the disappointment in his immigrant parents' eyes. I listened. At the end of the ride, I handed him a card for the Second Trade Foundation. Someone once told me, I said, catching his eye, that stubborn people trying to prove themselves deserve second chances. Don't wait 37 years to ask for help. That day, Silas Thorne gave me more than $89 million. He gave me permission to fail without becoming a failure. The fortune was just the instrument for an 82-year-old man's final, desperate act of forgiveness toward his own long-dead son. We learned that the roots of family run deeper than blood or money, connecting the failures of Wall Street and the struggles of a simple carpenter. Some families are built, not born, forged from a tragedy that spans 2 generations, teaching us that every ending is truly just a beginning, waiting for brave hands to build it. If this story of the $30K confession touched your heart, if it reminded you of a debt of kindness you need to repay, or a family member you need to call, please share this video. Leave a comment below about your own second chance, or the unexpected hand that pulled you out of the darkness. Subscribe to this channel, because every week, I share stories that remind us that shame is temporary, but redemption is forever. Remember, you are one conversation away from changing someone's life, or having yours changed.